There was a family of Hussaini Sayyids which had settled down in Rai Bareilly, about 49 miles from Lucknow. They were related to Shah Waliullah's family. A scion of this family, Sayyid Ahmad, was destined to play an important role in history. He was born in 1786. Since his very childhood, he had shown an inclination for manly sports, including horsemanship and the use of arms, which are part of the normal training of a Muslim gentleman in that age. In 1821, the Sayyid left for a pilgrimage to Mecca. Instead of choosing the shorter route from the west coast, he went by the river to Calcutta and embarked there for Arabia. His party consisted of 400 persons. The Sayyid stopped at many places to preach to the large crowds which gathered to hear him, and many enrolled themselves as his disciples. Sayyid Ahmad spent about a year and a half in Arabia. Sayyid Ahmad returned to India via Calcutta in May 1824. After mature deliberations, it had been decided to fight the Sikh kingdom of the Punjab. The Sikh rule was oppressive and showed extreme intolerance of Islam and the Muslims. If the Muslim majority area of the Punjab and the Pathan territories could be liberated, this would form a nucleus for further activities. The Pathans were resisting the expansion of the Sikh kingdom in their territories. They not only needed support in this venture, but would also prove good allies, because their own interests were involved, and apart from their Islamic loyalties being aroused, their immediate sense of danger would provide an incentive. The Sayyid reached Peshawar, and after a short stay made Naushera his headquarters in December 1826. An ultimatum was issued to Ranjit Singh, who ignored it. The Sayyid started operations against the Sikhs and was rewarded with success in the beginning. But soon, difficulties began to arise his warriors. In the midst of these difficulties, necessitating the transfer to Panjtar near Kashmir, the Sayyid was able to inflict defeat on the French general Ventura, who was in the employ of the Sikhs. The Sikhs were given battle at Bhogarmang and Muzaffarabad, in which the local population sided with the Sayyid. However, as the end of the campaign was near, the Sikhs were informed by some local person about a deserted and hidden approach to Balakot. They marched by this route upon the town. The warriors defended themselves with great valor, but the Sikhs were superior in numbers and much better equipped. Nearly 600 fighters lost their lives, including Sayyid Ahmad and his chief lieutenant, Shah Ismail. This happened in the beginning of May 1831. The disastrous end of the campaign does not prove that it was misconceived or lacked support. However, the Mujahideen made some serious mistakes for which they paid heavily. They did not take into consideration the conditions prevailing in the tribal area. The people could be trained only gradually to bear the burden of organized government. The Mujahideen had among them many theologians who did not have the imagination to see these factors clearly. They ignored the fact that the Quran had not been applied to the Arabs in one day, and that to make a people true Muslims requires a good deal of spade work. Then many of the followers of the Sayyid were too rigid in matters that were not essential features of Islam. They had been inspired by the thoughts of Shah Waliullah, but had ignored his moderation and spirit of conciliation. The tribesmen were staunch Hanafis, and they looked askance at the changes in the ritual of prayer which had been brought about by some of the zealous reformers. The Sayyid was moderate in his views, and he occasionally intervened. The tribesmen were suspicious of what seemed to them heretical innovations. Footnote: Shah Ismail Shaheed had adopted the ritual of raising his hands in the course of prayers, commonly known as Rafaidain. Sayyid Ahmad once said to him, "Malana, for whose pleasure do you lift your hands in prayer?" He said in response, "To please God." Then said the Sayyid, For his pleasure, please do not do it here. The point was that such a simple deviation from the ritual observed in the area was a source of trouble. Shah Ismail Shaheed had the good sense to accept this advice, but there were many who did not. The organizers of the campaign were fighting in territories hundreds of miles away from their homes, with all kinds of difficulties in the way of the transfer of such funds as could be raised. This campaign was also unique in the annals of the subcontinent for another reason. It was the first popular movement born of a consciousness of a political duty. Its purpose was not to resuscitate the throne or a dynasty. It sought to liberate fellow Muslims from bondage and tyranny. There were no personal ambitions involved in it. It was sustained by a people, not by a state or a potentate. It was born of a consciousness created by the writings of a thinker who had found in their moral regeneration the remedy of his people's ills. It failed mainly because the warriors who fought for their ideals were also reformers, and in the zeal for their convictions, they did not consider it right to postpone the establishment of their conception of the Islamic law for the sake of expediency, and also because they were pitted against very heavy odds. But they did succeed in creating in Muslim community a burning desire to emulate their example. It has been mentioned that most of these warriors were ardent reformers as well. Indeed, their zeal was an outcome of their religious convictions. There were certain reforms advocated by them which were non-controversial, like giving up such an un-Islamic practices as objecting to the remarriage of widows, and other similar customs picked up by the Muslims in the subcontinent. Condemnation of the excessive respect shown to the tombs of saints and to living spiritual preceptors was not received so well. The most severe controversy arose from rejection of the rulings of the school of Abu Hanifa and the adoption of the independent Ijtihad as a more correct method of practicing Islam. In practice, this led to the creation of a new code, different in some details from the four recognized schools, based upon the ijtihad of some theologians, once again crystallized into a school or even a sect. What Shah Waliullah had attempted was different. He had tried to break the barriers between the different schools and to give the competent scholar freedom to go direct to the sources of Islamic theology. Those who claimed to have adopted his teaching succeeded in doing just the reverse. They created another sect more intolerant of differences than the older schools. They attached so much importance to these minor points that they brought about a new fissure in the body of Islam. In the zeal of their convictions, they did not realize that they were defeating the very purpose of Shah Waliullah's teachings and were injuring the cause of the moral regeneration of Islam by raising controversies which are not fundamental. The Sayyid did not subscribe to all the views of his followers like Ismail Shaheed, and he exerted his influence on the side of moderation. And yet, it was a delicate matter, because there were the convictions of honest and sincere men who attached to them the utmost importance. It is also not impossible that the extremist views of some of the followers of Sayyid Ahmad Shaheed were the natural result of enthusiasm and exuberance. There is, however, little doubt that such extremism did great damage to the cause both among the Pathans and the Indian Muslims.